Hey everyone, it's Daniel Benting, and today we are going to be continuing with our planet tutorials. This series is about creating a planet and eventually creating a destruction effect where the atmosphere burns up. This episode is quite exciting. We get to work on the actual smoke cloud effect that engulfs the actual planet. But I'm actually going to split this up into two sections. So this video will cover the actual shader itself and the pattern of the clouds that we're going to create after the planet is actually engulfed in flame. And then the next part, which I'll do in a separate video, will cover the actual fire that burns up and sort of creates a mask between what we see now with our normal planet and it actually burning up and then being engulfed by our actual ash cloud material. Alright, so let's jump right in. Okay, so we've got our clouds selected. That's our cloud layer. If we press G to grab, I'll move it. So these are our clouds here. I'll just let go of that. Alright, so we've got our shader right here on the right. So we're going to basically be using this as our ash cloud. We're not going to be touching the surface of the planet or the atmosphere. We're just going to be using the cloud layer for this effect. The cloud layer will be the layer that you see the flames appear and the engulfed ash cloud. So I'll start with the mix shader because this is how we're going to mix and then eventually create a mask between our normal clouds and our ash cloud right here. And our ash cloud is going to go into the bottom slot. So for now, we'll just unplug that all together because we don't need to mask it out at the moment. We just want to work on the ash cloud on its own for now. So I'll basically set up another shader similar to that of the normal clouds. So we'll get the diffuse and glossy, which are added together, and the glossy that has a mix factor in it with an empty slot here. Very simple setup. We'll get our Fresnel as well. Plug that into the factor for our glossy. Plug that in there. And that will be our base shader. So let's plug that in to our surface, just so we can see it. And I'll hide everything else just so we're not wasting resources. Alright, so it's just our cloud layer. Now, the other thing as well is I actually want to add some translucency. This is just going to help with light being able to pass through our clouds. And we want to add this onto our normal clouds as well. This is something that we worked on in episode 2 when we were just working on our normal clouds. But I'll just go over it again so that we can have our nodes set up and then use them in our cloud ash material as well. So we'll do that now. I'll just take a look at the original clouds quickly with our planet in view, and we'll just get an add shader. Stick that in before I mix. And just, actually sorry, I meant to do mix. That's what I meant to do. I want to do mix, plug that in, get rid of the add. Okay, now we've got some translucency for our white clouds. We want to lower the factor a bit, and I'll actually plug the normals from our clouds into this shader as well. We want to have our normals plugged into every shader we use, and we can just change between them if we want to. So I'll only use a bit of the translucency, and then the rest can just be normal, and that's done. Alright, so let's continue on with our ash cloud material. So plug that back into our output. Alright, so for the moment we've just got something plain. We'll add our translucency in like we did with the other one. Alright, there we go. And now we actually want to work on a texture for this material. So let's begin with a Voronoi. Alright, so I'm going to plug this into the normal. So we want to go distance socket into the normal, and then like always when plugging into the normal we need a bump node, and make sure your texture is plugged into the height socket. Alright, now let's get a color ramp so that we can manipulate our Voronoi texture. Let's reverse this. Alright, we'll set it to B-spline to soften it. And now we can pull them in as we like. And as you can see, pulling the white up actually softens the sharp points we had just before. Now they're much softer. So we'll just play with that a little more. Get another point, see how that affects it. Alright, now we want to make sure it's set to smooth F1 so that we have smooth transitions in our actual texture. Because you noticed before we actually had very hard lines like this. And then smoothing it actually just softens that up a bit. And you can change it to whatever level you want. I think I'm actually going to go with something like 0.45. Yeah, that's looking soft. So that'll be our base. Let's scale it up a lot because it's way too big. Alright, that's looking alright. Let's just press Ctrl T to add our usual texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And let's continue to add levels to this. So I'll add another Veroni. Alright, let's get a color ramp, do all the same stuff so that we can manipulate it. And we'll get a math. Alright, I just want to add this on. Basically, we're going to make this one bigger, or make the scale bigger so that they appear smaller. So yeah, we can see that working. If we mute it, we can see what the original looks like. So press M on the selected node to mute. So yeah, we can see that. Press M to unmute. Yeah, we can see that extra level happening there. We'll also get multiply nodes on each level. So that's our top large Veroni and our small Veroni below it. And set these math nodes to multiply. And basically, as we've been doing in previous videos, we can use this trick to control our strength. Alright. So we've toned it down. Let's tone it down a little more. It's quite strong. Let's like crank it, see what it looks like first, and then lower it. See the difference. Right, so our small one's too strong. Let's put that to 0.18. See how that looks. I think I'll soften these up a little more with smoothness. Alright, so far we're getting something that looks puffy. Now I'm actually going to go back and change the color because I want this to be a dark grey color. Because it's meant to be an ash cloud, not normal clouds. It's meant to be very dark. I want to darken our translucency as well. Maybe a little more. Alright, now let's actually plug in our normal. So we've only got our glossy plugged in. We want to plug in our translucent shader and our diffuse shader. There we go, that's showing up a bit better now that it's in the diffuse. Alright. And yep, so our roughness is quite high. We want to leave it like that because, as I said in our cloud episode, we want the clouds to be very rough because clouds aren't really reflective. They disperse light very broadly. They diffuse it. They basically scatter the light very easily. Alright, I'll actually put that a bit higher. Something like that. There we go. Alright. Let's lower the intensity again. It's a bit strong still. Alright. 0.1. Yeah, it is a bit much. And now we're actually going to add a third level once you're happy with it. So we're going to make this level a noise texture instead of a Veroni. And now I'll just plug this into our main input so we can take a look at it to begin with. We'll get a color ramp. Cut that in a bit, see what we get. Lower the roughness a lot. Reason is because I want the clouds to be soft, and when the roughness is a bit too high, there's just a little too much detail for my liking. So we're going to make it low. Make the scale very high because we want these details to be smaller than the two Veronis that we have currently. So this is going to be like a third layer of really small detail. Alright, low roughness, put some detail into it, not too much, and then small scale. I want it to be smaller than the small Voronoi. Let's go something like that. Alright. And now I'll actually see what we get when we plug a second noise texture in. So we'll just duplicate that for now, and we'll take a look at what these look like together. So now we've got a very wavy look. I'll actually do a mix. So color mix, put it in between our noise textures, and then get our original socket from the mapping node, put that in the top slot, and have our version with the extra noise in the bottom slot. And then we can basically change the factor of how much that first noise warps the other one, so that we can basically not have it affect it a whole lot, but we can still have that sort of waviness and added distortion. So yeah, I think it's pretty effective. Like, we don't need to put it up very high at all. Like, even just that, if we mute, yeah, it becomes quite different. So it only needs to be very low, just to add a bit more waviness to it. And we can use this trick with our Voronoi as well, so we'll do that in a moment. But let's just take a look at what our full material looks like with our noise texture added. So we'll grab this, pull it back, and then, yeah, so we've got our add node here. We'll plug that in, and then we'll get a multiply so we can affect the strength. Alright, it's a bit strong, and it's a bit big too. I wanted it to be smaller. So that's looking a little more appropriate, maybe a little more. Alright, let's tone it down. It's a bit strong. Alright, a little more. I want this one to be very low. There we go. It's just very subtle. And I'm actually going to make it smaller again. Alright, something like 300. And now once we've added that, let's actually get that same trick, duplicate it, and do it for our main Voronoi, because I want to make my Voronoi a little more wavy. It's okay the way it is now, and if you like it the way it is, you can leave it like that, but I'm just going to see what kind of waviness we can add to it. Alright, move our Voronoi up, and then, like before, get the mapping, plug it into the top slot of our mix, plug that into our vector for our main texture, and then also plug in the noise. Then we can use the factor. So we'll just slide this up, see what happens. Yeah, and we can see it getting very wavy. It's a bit much for my liking. See what it looks like when it's off. Put it at 0.01. A little higher. I'll make the scale a bit smaller as well because it's a much bigger texture. Alright, let's up it a bit more. See how that looks. That's a little too much. There we go. I think that'll be okay. I'll just lower the strength of it again because I think it's a bit much. Just going to tweak the levels of all our bumps. Soften them up because they're a bit harsh. There we go, that's better. So those are our three layers. We've got a Voronoi, which is really large, a smaller Voronoi, and then a noise texture. And that's most of our main detail. The other thing, which is another major detail that we want to overlay over the whole thing, is actually some striping or some striations. Because basically when we do our mask and we have our flames engulfing our planet, we want to have lines of clouds that sort of follow the direction that the fire is traveling in because it's moving so fast. And the way to do that, the way we're going to do that, is actually with a wave texture. Alright, wave texture here. Get rid of the noise. Alright. Now we're actually going to put it in here. But first, we'll do what we did with the noise texture earlier. and we'll actually take a look at it on its own. Alright, and we'll give it the mapping and coordinate node with Control T. Then we can adjust it. Let's get a color ramp as always. Alright, forget everything I just said about the wave texture. We're not actually going to use that. Alright, so let's go back into rendered view. Alright, so we're actually going to use a noise texture. We're still trying to create the same effect, the striations or waves that travel along the planet when it's being engulfed in flame, but we're going to do it a different way. We're not going to use the wave texture. We're going to use a noise, and we're actually going to put it through a gradient. So we get a gradient texture, and we have that at the back, so we need our noise texture in front, and then we plug that in, and then we set our gradient to radial. Alright, and we want to plug that into our mapping. Alright, so we were plugging in our gradient texture to our noise, and what that's basically going to do is it's going to get our noise texture and sort of put it along a gradient. So now that we've got radial set, we take a look with it plugged in. There we go. Alright, so we can see stuff happening now. Bit weird. We'll actually go to object mapping, because that's going to choose the local mapping for the actual object, in which case is the center of the object. And now that we've done that, we can see it's working. So yeah, just remember to use object coordinates instead of generated. Okay, so yeah, we've got our gradient set to radial through our noise, and we're basically, what we're doing is putting our noise through our radial gradient. So it's creating all these lines to each of the poles. And what we want to do with that is we actually want to make it wavy. So what we're going to do that is actually warp it. And we're going to do that with both Voronoi and noise textures. So we'll start with a noise, and we'll get a color mix node. So this is a trick we've used a few times in this series. We're going to get the mix, plug our noise texture in from our mapping, and then plug that into the bottom slot and just have the top slot without that texture. And then as we can see some distortion. And as we turn it down, it becomes less distorted, and that's pretty cool. So we get those waves, and we can change that however we like. We can also affect our scale, much more wavy. And this is cool because you can use this effect to sort of create like a gas giant if you wanted to. I might do that in a future video. But you can also use the wave texture for this, but we're just using the gradient and radial effect, or the radial way of doing it, because I think that's going to be easier to manipulate than the wave texture for what we want to do. So we've got our waviness, and I'm actually going to add another level to this. Okay, so we want to get the another mix, and we'll put this in front of our noise texture, and then we'll get a Voronoi this time. Let's grab that. Alright, plug that into our mapping, and then we want to make sure we have our mix so that we've got our factor. So into the bottom like before, and then in the top with no texture. Alright, and then we can see how this looks. We can see that working there. We'll just up the scale because it's a little small. That should be right. Yeah, we can see the texture there. I think that's an alright size. I'll probably go smooth F1 as well so we get the smoothness. We'll adjust that. Something like that. Alright. Now, that just creates a bit more breakup. Yeah, there we go. I think I'll leave it like that. And then we'll go behind this texture and we'll add in another noise and see how that works. Alright, same as before. Stick it in the bottom, and then we'll adjust our factor. Probably a little big, so we'll make it smaller. Lower the roughness. Alright. I think something like 0.35 will do. Let's mute it. Yeah, just creating a bit more waviness. But yeah, it's a very interesting effect we've got. Lots of detail. Now what we're going to do is we're going to plug in our original material. So let's get our ash clouds, plug them in. So this is what we had with our Voronized and noise layers from before. What we're going to do is just grab our whole wave section and we'll plug them in. So now we need it at the end of the chain. So grab all this stuff, get another math node, and then we'll plug that in. Alright. Now it's very strong to begin with, so we'll want a math multiply node, and then we'll adjust it from there. So it's a bit low, let's up it a bit, still a bit much. Alright, see how that goes, and we've also got to adjust our color ramp, so we'll set it to B-spline to make it softer, and we'll start with everything pulled out. Just up the strength so we can see it. Alright, then we'll adjust our sliders. There we go, that looks nice and soft. Try it at the other end, see what we get. Yeah, that's sort of cutting off the lows, which isn't what I want. I want to shave off the peaks. There we go. That sort of, pulling in the white sort of brings it all up, so that the peaks aren't as accentuated. Alright, so that looks softer now. And those are sort of our clouds trailing along one direction, which is cool. I think it's strong enough as well. I don't think I need to make it adjust it any further. But I'll also just adjust the noise texture. I think we'll make it bigger so that we have more waves. I think I'll lower the strength a little more. 0.3. Alright. We'll save here. And now you'll notice we have sort of a pole, which isn't really what I want. So we've got all these nice waves going along the length or the circumference of the sphere. But then at the poles, it all converges and gets very small, and I don't like it. It looks a little ugly. So what I'm going to do is actually get a gradient texture. And we're going to start by doing a color mix, because we want to have a gradient texture that doesn't show this section. So basically we're going to be mixing between what we've already got, and then we're going to replace this top section. So first of all, we'll pull in a gradient texture. Alright, plug that into our output so that we can see it. Alright, then we'll get mapping with Control T, and we'll set this one to object as well because that's easier, and we can see it's mapped straight to the center of the object. We can see our gradient working, so we want to leave this one as linear because we want to keep this flat line effect happening, but we want to use a color ramp to change where that line is. So we'll add in another point on our color ramp, and then another one, set this one to black. And now we want to move the location to 0.5 on the x-axis, just so that it centers it, and we'll also rotate it 90 degrees on the y-axis. There we go. So now we've sort of got white where our poles are, but we'll just adjust our texture a little more. Alright, so adjusting the scale as well will help this. So yeah, just the Z, and then it's pretty much happening. Alright. See if we can add in more points with B-spline, make it softer. Alright, pull that up. Alright, that's looking good. So that's our gradient, and this is going to act as a mask for where our original cloud texture is, which is going to be where the black is, and where our new one is, where we're trying to mask out the icky convergence that we have. So let's plug in our main one and then pull up our gradient texture. So we've got our color mix here, and we want this gradient to act as the factor. So we'll plug that into the factor right here, and then we will basically get a new texture. Alright, so we can see that working. Anyway, it's doing some weird stuff because it's just got a blank texture in it. So what we'll do is we'll actually duplicate our original textures. So we'll get all this stuff, duplicate it, and you could just plug it straight in if you want to, so that you don't waste resources with more nodes. But I'm just going to duplicate it so that I can change it if I need to without affecting the rest of my texture. So we've duplicated that main cloud effect, and we'll plug that into the bottom. Alright. Okay, so now I just realized we've got to... What? Oh yeah, that's our wave section. Yeah, we don't want that. So let's remove that add node that we have on the end of that. So just this. Pull it into there. Sorry, I just realized I made a mistake. So nothing too big. Just gotta move the mix node. So I put it just before the bump node here. We don't want that, because what we've got here is we've got our main cloud textures coming in the top of this add right here, and then we've got our waves coming in from the bottom, added right on. And what we wanted to do was put our mask for our wave texture and replace the parts that were masked in white with our other texture down here. So what I actually needed to do was to basically put my mix node here. So let's just do that now. There we go. Alright, so yeah, we've come in just before adding the waves to the main texture, and we've just masked out the waves and replaced them with what's down here. So that's what that mix node is doing. And we've got our gradient mask up here. Alright, so if we take a look, we should be able to see that working. Yep, and it is. So you can see that we've got our waves up here, but at the top it doesn't converge. You don't see all those lines become really small because it's being replaced with our other set of cloud textures, which are down here. So that's what that gradient is doing. And I'm actually going to adjust my gradient a little more. Let me just bring that into our viewport for a moment. Alright. Just pull it out and soften stuff up. There we go. That's looking okay. Alright. Because, yeah, I just wanted to be able to make it reasonably soft. Alright, that will do. Now, let's plug our main material back in, and we'll see that working. Okay. So we're going to work on this top texture now that's on our poles, which is down here. And we're actually going to adjust the scale of our main Voronoi. Let's lower that. Just make it a bit bigger. Okay. That's looking alright. And the other thing that I am going to do is I'm actually going to add a wave texture to the caps or the poles. So we want to use this bottom slot of our mix because that's where our caps are, and we'll get a math add, and we're just going to add on a wave texture to sort of create this wavy effect, like sort of like there's just been an explosion. That's how we want our poles to look, because the pole is where we're actually going to have our flames start as they engulf our planet. And the top of that texture here where it converges, as you can see right here, we're going to add waves, basically as if like it's a shock wave. We have these layers of clouds like sort of circling at the pole. But then we've gradiated into this other sort of wave texture that goes along the planet as the fire travels. And so yeah, that's the effect we're going to create. We're going to create those waves around the poles. So let's add that in now. Alright. So we've got an add node. Add in the waves. Alright, we'll press Ctrl T for our mapping and texture coordinate. Set it to object. And then we'll rotate 90 degrees on the Y. Alright. So now that's there. We'll add some distortion. Add some detail and scale. And that's not too bad. Increase the roughness a little bit. And then I'm pretty happy with that. I think just maybe up the scale a little bit. And we'll get a multiplier to adjust the strength. We'll also get a color ramp as always. And we'll set it to B-spline so we can soften it. And we'll just do the same thing that we did with our Veroni. So see that we pulled it in. And we're going to pull that in. So let's actually take a look at what it looks like on its own. So we'll actually plug that into the normal. Right there, right in the height. Alright, so we can see it now. It's just the wave texture. And we'll set it to 1 to begin with, and we'll adjust how it looks with our color ramp. And that should be okay. We'll lower the strength by a lot. See how we go with that. I think it's a little noisy for my liking, so let's actually lower the roughness again. I've also got this thing happening, which I don't like. Give me a moment. Alright, so I'm actually just going to remove that extra point, and we're just going to just leave them end to end. And I think that's okay. So let's actually lower the roughness a little more, because I think it's still a bit too much. We want it to look somewhat soft. There we go. We'll see how that goes. Maybe add in a little more detail scale. Alright, see how we go with that. Now we'll actually plug our normal, or our whole height back in. Alright, and as we can see, it's not showing up very clearly, so we'll increase the strength of that effect with our multiply. There we go. I think that looks alright. It's working. We got our waves, and we got our streaks along the planet. So I'm actually going to increase the size of that wave texture. There we go. And I think it's a little strong overall. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grab the whole strength slider here on the bump node. I'm going to turn that down to something like 0.6 or maybe even 0.5. There we go, just to help it look a little softer. Alright. And I think to bring some balance back, I think I actually need to lower this a little more. So we'll lower this individually. So lower the waves a little bit. Just a little more. And then I'll increase the strength of my actual streaks. So over here, increase this just a bit. Alright. That'll do. Alright, so that's pretty much our clouds. So we've got everything. We've got our shader set up. We've added our translucency. Last thing actually, we'll add in a bit of noise to our color. So we'll get a texture. Noise texture, get a color ramp as well, and then we'll just plug that into color, and then we can see we've got some variation in color there. So let's increase the roughness, increase the scale a little bit, and increase the detail. maybe to 5. Alright, so also add some distortion as well, just to wave it around a bit. And I think that's all we really need. It doesn't need too much. So I'm just going to up this a bit to a dark grey, tone this down, and yeah, we don't want the effect to be very obvious. And let's actually try that in our translucent color as well. Alright. So that's looking alright. I'll be able to diffuse roughness as well, just to make that a bit rougher. You don't have to, like, you don't really have to touch the diffuse roughness, but I'm going to, just to diffuse the reflection a little more. Alright. And now, one of the last things is our Fresnel. So our Fresnel's back here, and we want to actually add in our normals. So, yep, right here, this is where our height is before we plug it into our bump map. So we'll plug the normal socket from the bump into our Fresnel. That way we just get the Fresnel working on our little normal or bump effects as well as our geometry. Now I just noticed something a little weird is happening. We're getting these strong pokes or scratches in our Veroni. Let me just sort that out. Alright, it's to do with our color ramp. Let's sort that out. Okay guys, so what I decided to do was increase the smoothness of my Veroni texture. I also did things like change the scale because I wasn't happy with it, but the main thing was adjusting the color ramp. I just decided to pull out the points because I felt that it was just doing too much to cut it down. I mean, you can have it like this if you want, but yeah, sometimes we just get that problem of them coming in very closely and creating this tight crevice, which isn't what we want. So I actually pulled it back. Alright. And then we'll plug in the rest. So we'll test out this one as well. Alright. So we can see it working here. So there it is. And we can see it's got the same problem. So let's pull that back. Let's remove this extra point. See how that does. There we go. Not too bad. So yeah, when we pull it in, it just creates a few errors. Alright, so let's just bring it out. Now I think that's okay. We get more variation this way anyway. More puffiness. So we'll leave it like that. And yeah, that should be all. Alright. So let's plug everything back in together. We'll take a look at what we've got. Alright, so it's a bit strong now with that added dynamic, or that added height difference. Because we had it pulled over here, but now it's all the way over here. So we'll just tone down the strength of these sections. There we go. Alright. I think that's okay. So that's pretty much it for our cloud layer, or our ash. So I'll add mapping to this noise texture with Control T. And let's swap these shaders over. Alright, so the other mistake I realized I made is I put the glossy into the top slot of our mix. We actually want our shader to be in the bottom. So if we plug our mix into the main shader, actually no, sorry, we'll just plug our Fresnel in and I'll show you. Okay, so our Fresnel gives us white on the edges and then darkness towards the front-facing areas. And white is the value of 1, which is our second slot, and black is the value of 0, which is our first slot. So as you can see, the white areas, which are our second slot, need to be more reflective because they're the bits that are facing at an angle from our eye. So that's why our glossy needs to be in our second slot. So I made that mistake, put it in the top slot. It just needs to be in the bottom. And then we've got nothing in the top slot, which is our front facing area. That's just so that we don't get the reflection as much in that area. Alright, so now that we've done that, we can see that our color is actually coming through much better now. So you can see it's much darker, which is what I was looking for. We'll just adjust it though, because I think it's a little too dark now. So we'll brighten it up a bit. And then that will do. So we've got it plugged into the color plugged into our diffuse and our translucent. And that's all we need. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next part. That's where the really exciting part is. I know this one was a bit dry and boring because this isn't a very exciting material, but believe me, it's going to look really cool when we add the burning gradient effect in the next part of this series. So this is Daniel Benting, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys.